Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Campus Organizing for Abortion Access, a digital event where students can learn more about the ways they can get involved in the fight for abortion access on their college campuses. My name is Adriana. I use she and they pronouns, and I'm the Assistant Director of Training with It's On Us. I'd love for us all to just take a moment and introduce ourselves in the chat box by sharing our names, our pronouns if we're comfortable, and what campus you're affiliated with. All right, I see a Susquehanna University. Love that. William Smith, some more Susquehanna. Y'all showed up today. All right, some from Oklahoma, Chicago. It looks like we have the whole nation here, which is wonderful. Maryland, George Washington University, University of Oklahoma. Thank you all for coming out. This is wonderful to see. So thank you all for being here today. This event was produced in collaboration with the United States of Women, which aims to create a world in which women and all people of marginalized genders can thrive, and Rape on Campus, which works to end campus sexual violence through support for survivors, their communities, education, and policy reform. And It's On Us, which aims to build a movement to combat campus sexual assault by engaging all students, including young men, and activating the largest student organizing program of its kind in grassroots awareness and prevention education programming. For today's program, we will be leading a panel discussion with our speakers to discuss the importance of using a reproductive justice framework in our work. We'll learn about the current legal landscape for young people that need access to abortion care. And we'll hear about the amazing organizing work a student activist is leading on their own campus. We'll then open the conversation up to questions from the audience. And finally, we'll lead with a call to action on how to center community care in your own student activism. Just a few housekeeping notes really quick before we begin. Please make sure that you stay muted during the panel discussion, but you will have the opportunity to come off mute during the Q&A portion. And you can turn on the closed captioning function by clicking on the little CC icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Now I'd like to hand it off to my wonderful colleague, Emily Escobar.
Thanks so much, Adriana. Good afternoon. It's so great to see everyone. My name is Emily Escobar. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Campaigns and Organizing Associate at the United States of Women, and I will be moderating today's panel. And I also have the pleasure of introducing our amazing lineup of speakers. So please help me in giving a warm virtual welcome to our first panelist, Lakia Williams. Lakia Williams is an award-winning reproductive justice organizer with experience in organizing and communications. She has created a reproductive health mutual aid program for young people in the South, and her work sits at the intersection of RJ and abortion destigmatization. She is the project manager for the Abortion on Our Own Terms campaign, where she manages the traveling abortion destigmatization exhibit, the Stigma-Free Zone, that has presented at 8 different events in the past 12 months, including Sister Songs, Let's Talk About Sex, and Essence Festival. Creatively, Lakia is the executive producer and creator of Black Feminist Rants, an independent reproductive justice podcast. And she is also the board vice chair of Access Reproductive Justice, California's statewide abortion fund. Next, we have Day Efon, student activist with Advocates for Youth. Day is a third-year undergraduate student pursuing a degree in public health and communication studies at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Her latest project consists of working on medication abortion access at the University Student Health Center. She's passionate about reproductive justice, working with the Carolinas Abortion Fund, Advocates for Youth, and Planned Parenthood in various capacities. She is the founder of the Reproductive Justice Collective at UNC Charlotte, providing students with abortion resources and safer sex supplies. Recently, she was featured in an article about emergency contraceptive access for local Charlotte-based universities. Thank you, Day, for being here today. And then last but certainly not least, we have Gerald Hayes. Gerald Hayes, she, her, has focused her legal career to social justice and gender equity, with specific expertise in reproductive health, rights, and justice issues. and holds a JD from Washington University in St. Louis School of Law and a Master's of Law with a specialization in gender in the law from American University, Washington College of Law. She currently serves as the Senior Movement Building Director at If When How Lawyering for Reproductive Justice, where her role is to shape movement building strategies, grow and evolve programs, and oversee the mobilization and networking of law students and legal professionals to champion reproductive justice within and beyond the legal system. So thank you all for being here today. We're going to go ahead and start our panel discussion. So I'm going to kick it off first by starting discussing the importance of advocating for abortion access through a reproductive justice framework. Sister Song, the Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective, defines reproductive justice as the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, to have children, not have children, and parent the children we have in safe and sustainable environments. Historically, many communities have faced barriers to truly achieving reproductive justice. So Lakia, I'm gonna hand it off to you. What are some ways that particular communities have historically been marginalized by institutions when it comes to accessing reproductive health care? I know that's a big question.
Starting off very strong with the important questions. Thank you for that question, Emily. And also thank you for grounding us in a definition of reproductive justice so that we're all on the same page. To answer this question, like you said, it's a very big question, but I would like to just say that since colonizers first stepped foot in on these lands, reproductive oppression has been enacted, from the genocide of indigenous people to the forced rape to the forced birth. There's been so many forms of reproductive oppression, so we can't even talk about what's happening in America without acknowledging that reproductive oppression is, woven into the framework of this country. And so, of course, I did not stop with colonization. When we think about reproductive health as a field, about gynecology, obstetrics, those fields were created off of the trauma and violence that Black women experienced, enslaved Black women experienced. So I just want to name Betsy, Lucy, and Anarcha, the most well-documented enslaved Black women who were experimented on for the rise of gynecology, and just really bringing them into this space when we're talking about reproductive healthcare, because we wouldn't have these conversations in this field without I can't even say contributions they made, because again, it was just tons of violence. And it's sad that, from the inception of this country to now, we're still facing so many of the similar things with forced sterilization of imprisoned women in prisons. So nothing has really changed. But to speak more specifically to specific marginalized communities that have had issues accessing reproductive health care, even just thinking about abortion access specifically, we know with all of these abortion restrictions, such as parental consent laws, young people are having a really hard time accessing abortion care because there's so many different layers that they now have to get past in order to access care. Also thinking of the lack of healthcare insurance coverage for abortion care in this country. So that really restricts poor people from accessing abortion care. There's no federal funding for health insurance that covers abortion, as well as private health insurance can elect not to cover abortion care. So there's so many different avenues that institutions and politicians have gone to restrict people's access to care. And even thinking outside of abortion care, specifically thinking of maternity care deserts, that greatly restricts Black and Brown people's access to just birthing support. So maternity care centers don't have birth centers or obstetric providers in their community that people can go to when they are pregnant and giving birth. So it really highlights how we're talking about abortion, but this marginalization and this oppression of people's bodies and how they're able to live their lives goes beyond abortion, and it impacts people's reproduction across the reproductive spectrum.
Thank you for really framing that question and showing the legacy of the US and our history and how it's all intrinsically tied. So next I want to pass it off to Gerald. Even before the overturning of Roe versus Wade, young people, especially those under 18, faced barriers when accessing reproductive health care. Gerald, can you talk about what some of those legal barriers are and how they impacted and in many cases exacerbated with the overturning of Roe versus Wade last year?
Sure. So I'll start by saying this, that even among folks who identify themselves as being pro-choice and generally progressive, there has still been stigma and shame around young people and sexual and reproductive health well before the overturning of the Dobbs decision. So even before we got to a point where abortion and reproductive health care was limited for everyone, we acknowledge that young people still had challenges in being able to access their full range of sexual and reproductive health care needs, including access to comprehensive sex education, access to contraception and abortion care, and even having support for young people who did decide to parent. So in terms of sex education, we've seen an increase in conservative folks who are taking over school boards, boards of education, and other agency positions that determine whether schools have comprehensive sex education or go with a more abstinence-only option, noting that for most school districts, it's actually a financial decision because there's a lot more funding that's available to provide abstinence-only sex education as opposed to funding for more comprehensive sex education options. And many of these abstinence-only programs use misinformation, shame, and scare tactics, and they rarely, if ever, mention LGBTQ folks. They don't mention them in a positive light. Usually it's a negative light. They also don't include trauma-informed language and framing to address the needs of young people who may have experienced sexual assault or sexual trauma, and in particular in how they are talking about these issues without taking those experiences into consideration. So sex education is one, having comprehensive sex education is one area. We also know in terms of contraception that there positively has been greater access to, in general, to contraception because of provisions of the Affordable Care Act, but that these did not always make their way down to young people. So it's great that young people are able to stay on their parents' insurance plans until the age of 26, but there are still some barriers in place that may make accessing contraception still challenging. For example, some insurance companies make it very difficult to redirect the explanation of benefits. So when you get any sort of healthcare services, there's usually a write-up of what you're getting. There's an explanation of benefits that typically goes to the account holder, the policy holder. And in some cases, you can make a request to redirect that to the person who is receiving care. But in other cases, insurance companies make it very difficult and still make it go to the policy holder. And we know that for some young people, they don't necessarily want their parents, for whatever reason, to know that they're accessing contraceptive services. So that can be one of the barriers. In other instances, there's been challenges for young people being able to access methods that should be available over the counter and without age restrictions, but we've seen barriers erected by their local pharmacies that have made getting contraception more challenging than it should be, requiring IDs when they actually shouldn't require IDs, requiring prescriptions in some places for contraceptive methods that don't actually require prescriptions, making it difficult even for male partners or male identified partners to be able to offset the costs of contraception by picking it up themselves. In some places, pharmacies make it difficult for people other than people who identify as women to get those services. For abortion access, we know that prior to the Dobbs decision, 38 states had requirements for young people to involve a parent in accessing an abortion, either by requiring consent and or notification, or requiring a young person to obtain a judicial bypass in order to access an abortion. So even in states where abortion was otherwise legal, there were a different set of rules for young people and people under the age of 18. And now with abortion access even more limited, with more states banning abortion for everyone and not just young people, this just makes access to care, to abortion care, even further out of reach for young people. And then finally, for young people who do decide to parent, they can still face additional barriers and shame and stigma for being a young parent. So that's a place that we do need to do a lot of work in addressing stigma. There are economic barriers, including challenges in navigating the system to obtain public benefits like healthcare, nutritional benefits, and other public support systems. And in some cases, the pregnant and parenting young person may face disruptions in their to their education, with some schools not allowing for accommodations for parenting and nursing needs. And in some cases, a school may not allow a pregnant person to continue to be in school in person once they become visibly pregnant. So, we've seen a lot of places where just the stigma around young people being able to access care, the laws really going into being as strict as possible for young people, being able to access care. And then I'll just note about the Dobbs decision itself, that it not just impacted abortion care, but other access to reproductive health care has been impacted, and particularly for young people. So as a result of Dobbs, we've seen more states become emboldened to substitute their judgment for that of their citizens, including, access to contraception and particularly gender affirming care, especially for young people under 18, even if they have the support of their parents. So we've just seen an increase in the number of restrictions for young people.
Thank you, Gerald. I think that really shows why we need to get involved and be a part of this work. So with that, I wanted to pass it over to Day. I know throughout your undergraduate journey, you've been organizing for abortion access on your campus. Can you tell us about some of your recent abortion campaigns or initiatives that you're particularly proud of?
Yes, thank you. So through the Reproductive Justice Collective, our most recent campaign is Abortion for All. We've been working with our student health director, pharmacy as well, to make sure that we are able to stock medication abortion pills and also offer abortion services to our students. So currently that is a project that is taking a lot of energy. As you know, the university and administration can always say one thing and then of course do the other thing. And currently, something that I'm facing is the fact that our director has actually left her position. So now there's a vacancy in the middle of this process, after we've sent all of our suggestions to legal and the pharmacy has worked through getting their licensure and making sure that everything is okay. Now we are left in a place where the next student health director coming in could make a decision to be like, no, I'm not interested in offering these services to our students. So it's just making sure that we're keeping our students engaged, making sure that we're doing outreach with our students, doing tabling, letting them know that yes, on your student insurance, you do have abortion services that can be provided and you can use your student insurance to receive those services. Letting students know that, hey, it's so much easier if you're able to receive those services on campus. Wouldn't you love that? Rather than having to go almost an hour to the closest abortion clinic if you don't have the proper ways and means of transportation. Just making sure we're engaging students in that conversation as well, hearing what they would like in terms of support, having a doula-based program set up in order to support our students as they're going through the process as well. So overall, just that's been a bit of what the campaign and the organization is going through, as well as just making sure that we're doing the prevention beforehand, giving out free Plan Bs to students, safer sex supplies such as internal, external condoms, dental dams, and just overall informing students from A to Z as to how sexual education works and making sure that we're all on the same playing field.
Thanks, Day. So students are really the important advocates that we need in our communities. So kind of want to touch on that. And, now that we have the historic background on why it's so important to center reproductive justice as a framework, Lakia, how can students ensure that they're centering this framework of reproductive justice in their campus activism?
Yeah, definitely. Honestly, the best way to ensure that reproductive justice is at the center of any activism is really just ensuring that we're centering the people who are the most impacted by the issues we're discussing. So making sure the most marginalized people are in the room and really ensuring that they're not an afterthought, like we're not planning and making these decisions and being like, oh, I don't have anyone that actually meets this community. Let me bring them in. They should be in the decision making. They should be from the onset of the project. So that's the number one way to ensure that RJ is centered in any activism, as well as really just questioning any assumptions that we may have and really interrogating why we have those assumptions. So if you're thinking, oh, once abortion becomes legal everywhere, then everyone will have access. Why do we have that assumption? Just like really teasing out those questions, because then you'll very quickly realize that even if it's legal, it's very inaccessible for many people, as we saw before the Dobbs decision even came out, right? So Roe has always been, the ceiling, the floor, ooh, it's been a long day, has always been the floor. So yeah, just questioning any assumptions that we have and really just acknowledging the privileges that you have. So if you're thinking once it's legal, it's going to be accessible, you probably have a financial privilege that for you, it would be accessible. So really just making sure that, one, having those people in the rooms, because they will very quickly tell you and show you your biases and kind of get you together. And then also just questioning every assumption that you have to ensure that we are incorporating everybody and not just centering our own experiences, and moving from a framework of the privileges that we have.
I love that. I hope folks are taking notes because I think that's really important. So according to a recent 2023 Gallup report, nearly 75% of currently enrolled college students said that reproductive health laws in their college states are at least somewhat important in their decision to stay enrolled. And about 60% of unenrolled adults say that these laws are at least somewhat important in their enrollment decisions. So for many people, they say that the overturning of Roe means the fight for abortion access is now at the state level. Gerald, can you talk about ways that students can get involved in state level advocacy work?
Yeah, so some of the best ways that folks can kind of look to their local communities. There's a lot that is happening at the state levels, and there are a number of groups that are really fighting back on these issues in a couple of different ways. So some of the ways that folks can get involved is with the ballot initiatives that are happening. So local groups who are going door to door to collect signatures, because we have seen a lot of success of my home state of Ohio. Just yesterday had some great success with some attempts to kind of roll back the opportunities for the more conservative folks to kind of take over. So there will be a ballot initiative in the in their election, so that many states will have opportunities to affirmatively support reproductive health care in their state constitutions, mainly through ballot initiatives. So that's one of the most vital ways that folks can get involved. There is also proactive state bill advocacy. So because right now there is better opportunities to get state protections versus having federal protections. So there are groups that are organizing lobby days where they will bring people into their state capital to advocate in support of proactive legislation, or sometimes they may be advocating against more harmful legislations. But they'll also have, on these different bills, they'll want to have people call their legislators, to use social media to really raise their voices and let their state legislators know how they feel about those particular issues. And then there's always opportunities to really help your local community, especially through mutual aid opportunities. So there are abortion funds, there are practical support networks. There's always a need for helping to educate your peers and community members about these issues that are really important for folks. So definitely wanted to encourage folks to look for those local organizations. So there are chapters of larger organizations. For example, NARAL had affiliates. They've now kind of become more independent, but you can still kind of search for the NARAL state affiliates that are doing work. There are a number of national organizations that have sort of state-based advocacy that happens. URGE does a great job of working in particular states on college campuses. So just do a little bit of research and or talk to some of the national groups to see what local chapters, what state chapters are happening in communities. But there's a lot of ways to your community.
Awesome. I think folks know what their marching orders are now to look up their local reproductive rights, health, and justice organization. So I want to pass it back to Day. As a student activist and youth leader in your community, what do you believe is a student's and/or a young person's role in the fight for abortion access? And how can students really step into their power and start making change in their own communities?
Oh, that's a powerful question. I think honestly, our role is being builders. As we know, Dobbs is really, the floor. So now it's our job to build what we really want abortion access to look like, what we want reproductive and sexual health care to look like for our future. So I think honestly, our role, especially as students, as young people, is to be builders, making sure that we are working and creating spaces that we believe in, that are showing equity, and making sure that we're supporting marginalized communities through it. And just overall being a force as well. There is power in numbers, and young people wholeheartedly believe in this together. And the more that we come together, the bigger our force becomes. So I believe that's kind of our role when it comes to that, and just overall supporting each other and making sure that we're being good peers to each other in this fight, because this is a long fight. And this is something that we have to make sure that we don't get tired before the other side gets tired.
I love that. And I think like sometimes we forget how much power campuses and like student or college communities have. Like sometimes these communities are bigger than, you know, certain towns, and it's incredible to see if we all come together how much change we can make. So I love that you said that. So Lakia, you run a podcast called Black Feminist Rants that centers new voices in the reproductive justice and Black feminist movement. As someone who has built a strong base of supporters through your podcast, can you talk more about what the fight for abortion access looks like from a media standpoint, and how students can start using social media to amplify their voices in the movement?
Yes. So surprisingly for me, talking about abortion access on the podcast and on social media platforms like TikTok and Instagram has been a pretty positive experience, which it does make sense because most Americans do support abortion in general. So we're really just pushing politicians and people with power to vote and make decisions in alignment with most people in this country. So yeah, when I'm posting about abortion access and resources, the most responses that I get are people like yearning for more information. People want to, like, they hear me say abortion fund and they're like, what's an abortion fund? How do I access one? Like, how do I get these resources? Wait, I can have an abortion at home. How do I get the pills? Like, how do you use the pills? So there's so much just yearning for information. And I feel like Gerald mentioned the lack of sex ed in this country and this abstinence only based sex ed. We're really doing our young people and everybody in this country in general a disservice by not talking about these things. And unfortunately, people turn to social media and the media to learn about sex ed and abortion access, which can be very scary because we know that one of the main tactics of the anti-abortion movement is misinformation. There was a study that found about 15% of people who were pregnant attempted to use Plan B to end their pregnancy because they were confused about whether Plan B could actually end a pregnancy, because we know that's the talking point of the antis. And so when abortion is in a time-sensitive, someone's in a time-sensitive place, if they're using Plan B, they're just like, that's taking up more time that they may not have depending on what state they're in or what circumstance they're in. So that's one of the big things for me is like, there's so much information on the internet and definitely not wanting to feed into the misinformation. So I feel like if you're someone that wants to use social media to advance reproductive justice or abortion access specifically, having a very high code of ethic, like obviously we should research everything that we share on the internet, but especially around abortion access because there's so much misinformation both online and in traditional media. And then I know I started this by saying, actually, it's surprisingly, it's been great. The antis do exist online and they will come. So definitely if any young person is looking to start talking about abortion online, be prepared for that, especially if you are a Black person or a person of color. They will use racial terms to describe you. They will say racist things. So be aware of that. And yeah, most of the anti-comments, they are very uncreative. They're very unoriginal. You can kind of predict what they're going to say. Abortion is Black genocide, baby killer, like it's all the same. So I feel like it kind of rolls off your back at some point because like I know what's going to come. But the impact of like getting people the information they need just outweighs that so much. I've had someone come in the comments and be like, oh, I saw your video about abortion funds and I contacted this fund and now my procedure is paid for. So you definitely can do a lot of good. Oh yeah, it happens a lot too, especially on TikTok. So you sharing this information that you have really can go a long way because so many people don't know of the resources that exist. And so I would definitely say if someone's looking to get more involved with social media activism, which is like a touchy term because, you know, whatever, but definitely focus on sharing resources and sharing information on how people can get the things that they need.
I love that. And I love that somebody was able to get connected to their local abortion fund. That's so awesome. Well, speaking of resources, Gerald, for students that are seeking abortion care, what are some legal resources that they can turn to or recommend to their peers, especially as we're seeing the legal landscape continue to change?
So I obviously have to represent my organization. I'm going to drop the link in the chat. So this is one of the best places for legal support, especially if you have questions about self-managed abortion. We know that for a lot of folks, because of the clinics being unavailable in their communities, more and more folks are looking at self-managed abortion, which is safe and effective. So if you have questions, usually it's not a health risk that people are taking with a self-managed abortion, it's a legal risk. And so we want folks, if they have questions about their legal risk, to reach out to our helpline. There is also information on the helpline for if you are a young person who is seeking, if you live in a state that requires a judicial bypass and don't want to involve your parents in a decision, there's also support for how do you access a judicial bypass for folks who are under the age of 18. So that would be my main place. And then if you have a question that we aren't able to answer on our helpline, then our helpline counsel are great at directing folks to, they'll be able to help us assess what your legal risks are and guide you to other support. We also have a legal defense fund. So if you know of anyone who is prosecuted or is criminalized because of because of concerns about their because of their abortion, we can connect folks to different funds. There's also the Abortion Defense Fund that is also a place for folks to get legal support.
I love that. Yes, we definitely want to make sure that we're sharing information about the Repro Legal Helpline. Great resource. Definitely recommend folks to share it out to their communities as much as they can. So, we've been talking about how the landscape of abortion has been changing and how certain states have enacted restrictive abortion bans. Data, you go to school in North Carolina, which is a state with a 12-week abortion ban. How can students living in states that are hostile to abortion deal with the frustrations of fighting for abortion access in their state?
Thank you for that question. So, yes, students right now, I think the main two ways to truly work through these frustrations is one, just building community and coalition. So what that looks like, of course, as we said, is joining abortion access groups that you already do have in your community. I know Carolina Abortion Fund, they're here in North Carolina and South Carolina, providing funding for anyone looking to have an abortion. So of course, joining those groups that you do have locally, and even starting your own on campus. A lot of North Carolina campuses actually do have groups that are interested in reproductive and justice in general, and their framework is centered around that. So making sure you're joining those groups, and as I said, it being a force, being part of the building portion of the abortion access fight. And then also just educating yourself. Everything is changing every day. There's new legislation always coming out. There's new information, learning more about medication abortion at home. And overall, just making sure that you're staying up and familiar with your state abortion ban and how it actually does affect students in your student community. And as I said, talking with those students, learn what their needs are. So, abortion access indirectly works with housing justice, food justice, and making sure you're also paying attention to those other forms of justice and really taking care of your students, because that's also part of their frustration when trying to access abortion. And then, as I said, last but not least, but self-care. You have got to take care of yourself, go on that vacation, take that break when needed, do what you need to do, because this is a movement. It's not going anywhere, and you're gonna have to put a lot into this fight. So make sure that you're just taking some time for yourself. You have a group of people like-minded who believe in the same thing as you. So trust and believe that they will pick up the slack or do the work when you're not able to as well.
I love that last part about self-care. I think it's so important. And speaking of, being involved with people and having your community, Lakia, I wanted to throw it back to you. You had an episode with Renee Bracey-Sherman, who is the founder and executive director of We Testify. And you two discussed the importance of abortion storytelling. Can you share a little bit about why storytelling is such an important tool in the movement and how student activists can center storytelling in their conversations?
Definitely. And I saw Gerald with the heart to Renee. So I do want to, before I get into that, talk about how the episode even came to be. I started my podcast when I was interning at Sister Song, and I was asking my supervisors at the time to connect me with different people in the movement and interview. And I was going to interview this one person who was really big in the movement, this white lady. And then there was like this drama that happened where she was like taking the credit of Black women's labor, Renee's labor. And I was like, oh, we can't have you on the podcast. So I DM'd Renee and I was like, hey, I want to talk to you instead. And she was like, period. And then we had her on the podcast. So I just love that story about actually like uplifting other Black women and people in this movement and like highlighting their labor and not allowing that to be co-opted by other people. So storytelling, yes. Storytelling is so important because it transforms narratives and just like our cultural understanding of things. And, I talked about colonization and like genocide, everything in the beginning when I first spoke. And so when colonization happened, we lost a lot of like our practices. And one of those practices is storytelling. That's one of the ways that we pass down knowledge, that we shared wisdom. And so I really want us to, in the movement, and Renee specifically, really wants us to center people's lived experiences. And so, sorry, I got a little distracted. I was thinking about Renee and just all the great things. I was like, ooh. But I think storytelling is so important in this day and age as well, is because so much of the antis and the quote unquote pro-lifers have controlled the media narrative, especially in movies and films. And so there's always been this stigma around abortion that we've seen in pop culture. And again, because we don't have sex education, people are learning about abortion through pop culture. So we're seeing, they don't even say the word abortion. Abortion is seen as dirty. Anyone who has an abortion on film has all this shame and regret and all these other things. So obviously people are going to internalize those beliefs and apply that to the rest of the world. And that's why storytelling, specifically abortion storytelling, is so important, because it combats those beliefs and it shares people's authentic stories in their lives with people, so they can actually learn about what abortion truly is, and not through the eyes of someone who's an anti-abortionist who probably has had an abortion and does support abortion, but because they're like embedded to white supremacy, they're going to act like they don't because they want to control people's bodies. That's a whole side note. And then again, circling back to something Gerald said about sex education, I personally believe that abortion storytelling is a form of education, because we don't have sex ed, we're not learning about abortion. So if someone doesn't know what abortion is, or they don't know how to, access abortion care or what to expect, they can learn that through someone's story. And because we don't have education that's like really meeting that need, people are going to seek that out, like I said, through social media or through media. And that's how we're sharing our stories, through interpersonal conversations as well as through media. So I feel like that is a really great way to teach people about resources in their community, as well as just educating them on what an abortion is. So I think that abortion storytelling is amazing. It also really helps people with other forms like of reproductive things that are going on in their life. So when I had my miscarriage, when I didn't know that I was pregnant, I knew I was miscarrying because my friend, who I've heard her story so many times, I was like, oh, these are the same things that are happening to my body. I think I need to go to the hospital. But if I didn't know about abortion stories, I really wouldn't have known what was going on with my body. And I didn't until it clicked. It was like 2 a.m. I was like, what's going on? And then it finally clicked. So it supports people in all different aspects of the reproductive health journey. So I think that's why it's so important. And yeah, we love Renee, we love We Testify. And if anybody has had an abortion and they want to, get some training on how to share their story, I definitely encourage them to get connected with We Testify. And I'll drop a link in the chat.
Thank you, Lakia, and thank you for sharing your story. So we have about, I want to say 3 minutes. So I'm going to hand it over to Gerald for one more question. So Gerald, in your opinion, from like a legal standpoint, what would a world look like where abortion is accessible? Like, what laws would you see in place?
I love this question because I am a dreamer and a visioner. And despite me choosing the law as my primary viewpoint to do this work, just recognizing that the law is not going to save us. That when I think about what I would like the law to look like, I think about the way that the reproductive justice framework was utilizing a human rights framework, which means that there's a belief that there are inherent duties of the government, of the state in terms of how they are supposed to remove barriers for folks and to provide support for folks. And that's the framework that I envision if we ever got to that system of the law, that the law actually centers the people whose needs are most needed. So I know, earlier it was mentioned that, the Roe decision was the floor, not the ceiling. And in part because the Roe decision was a compromise decision from the beginning. And as much as we didn't necessarily want to see Roe fall, I think people need to understand that Roe wasn't actually centered around pregnant people. Roe was centered around providers. That was a strategic decision in order to get certain Supreme Court justices on board. But what it meant was that what somebody actually needed, the resources that somebody needed, the support that people needed, the law didn't actually address that. The Roe decision didn't actually address that. The ways that things were framed didn't actually address what were the specific needs of a pregnant person. And so having laws that actually center the people, what people need, not just to survive, but to thrive, meaning that they have access to resources, that any sort of barriers related to reproductive health care decisions, including abortion, would include, any of those barriers would be removed, and that it's the state's role, it's the role of the law to remove those barriers for folks, so that folks have, again, what they need to thrive, and are able to make those deeply personal decisions without interference from the state, and particularly that there's not state violence involved in people's decisions about their own lives.
Thank you. I love the way that you approach that question. So we are at our 15-minute mark, so I want to make sure that we have enough time for Q&A. So first of all, I want to say thank you all for our speakers for being here and for your amazing work in the movement. We're truly so grateful to have you here and for taking the time out of your day to be with us. I hope our audience enjoyed hearing from our speakers and having that valuable insight. So now I'm going to open it up to the floor for a couple of questions from our audience. Your questions can be directed to a particular panelist, or you can ask more of a general question. So I encourage folks to either raise their hand to come off of mute and ask your question, or if you feel more comfortable, you can drop the question in the chat box. So I'm going to go on mute and see if anybody has any questions for our panelists. Yes, Solomon.
Yes, this is directed at Day, mostly because we're in the same state. I'm here in the Triangle in North Carolina, and I'm responsible for crafting the abortion rights resolution in the 2024 Democratic Party platform, which I have done based on the 14th Amendment, which I see there's actually a solution there. What I wanted to ask was, I wanted a couple of things. I'm having trouble interfacing with the student body here at UNC Chapel Hill, because apparently the administrative body has sort of clamped down on discussions on campus. So a lot of things are working underground, and I'm having trouble finding where they are and breaking into that, and wondered if you had any kind of ideas or thoughts about that. And also I wanted to be able to kind of, if you feel comfortable, kind of interfacing with you, exchanging emails for more information for what I'm trying to do. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Solomon. Yes, I would love to help with that as well, and feel free to email me. I can put my email in the chat right now. But considering that the administration is clamping down on students, and as you said, a lot of this work has started to go underground, kind of when it comes from a student perspective. I think looking into specifically some student organizations, and I can also send you a list that I know that are still active. Some students I know that are active at Chapel Hill doing this work very similarly. Can connect you with them, and they should be able to provide some information or at least assist you in your process as well. But if you're also looking for another ground, Charlotte, luckily that's something our administration has said that they won't do. They will allow us to speak our mind. They'll allow us to voice our piece. And yeah, so we're lucky for that. And if you'd like, you can receive assistance from us on our end as well.
Thank you. I'll be getting in touch.
Awesome. Love that, making connections. So I'm going to go to a question in the chat box. This is for anybody to answer. So sometimes it can be daunting to know where to start when you're getting involved in a fight. If there's one thing that people can do to support the fight for abortion access, what would you tell them to do?
So I'll speak on this real quick. Learn. Go to every training session that you can go to. Be in every room. Listen to anyone who has as much information and advice as you have. Just be present in the moment and learn what abortion healthcare really is. Learn what abortion justice really is, and learn what you can do and ground yourself in that work. And just take time to learn, because all of this is not just a one day you understand, okay, this is what abortion access is and this is what we got to do. There's never a game plan to this. So just learn, be there, be in those rooms, and just take your time, and eventually everything will come together.
Awesome. I love that. And then Gerald also suggested that folks reach out to or check out All Above All's website, because they have they're made up of a multitude of reproductive health rights and justice organizations. So I'm going to pass it to John. If you want to come off mute and ask your question.
Thank you. I'm used to talking to a group of women. I'm an activist in the League of Women Voters. So my number one message to you is we are starting college clubs. We need League of Women Voters, and the agenda is reproductive rights and then universal care and single payer. So I'm going to be real brief, but this is I put this in the chat. This is the February 23rd report on infant mortality or maternal mortality and how bad it is. You all know these facts. This is a beautiful work of art. We do a monthly newsletter as the League of Women Voters. I'm really proud of this article about doulas. One more thing. 2 years ago, we got this Black woman in Chicago to talk to us in Davis, California, us white people. And we got 44 leagues from 20 states around the country to co-sponsor it, and 188 people watched it live for 2 hours. That was 2 years ago. We're doing what we can with the League of Women Voters, but we're all on Medicare. We need people that don't know what Medicare is and they don't want it. Okay, now you folks came out of Obamacare and I love you for it, but we need to move on. And so the debate is, where do we go from here? And I'm on your side 100%. Thanks for doing this. I had a great time. All my friends now are midwives and doulas that are retired. So I do know what you're talking about. 75 to 80% of the time, it's the most natural thing. So I'm only going to say one thing from my speech. You have 8 chromosomes. I only have 7. Every gene in your body, every cell in your body has more communication than my body has, and it's for you to be able to have a baby. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So if folks are interested, I know you dropped that in the chat box. Thank you for sharing that. And I think we can do maybe 2 more questions. So I see Maya, you have your hand up if you want to come off mute.
Hi, yeah, this is a general question. So I go to DePaul University in Chicago, and even away from abortion access, there's a contraceptive ban on the campus where we can't hand out any kind of contraceptive. We can't be seen with a contraceptive, so we can't even like show how they're used or give examples. So I was wondering if you guys had any suggestions on how to start dismantling those kind of bans on universities throughout the nation.
That is a good question. I know that it's not necessarily the focus of our organization, but I do know that there are other organizations that are looking at what's happening on college campuses. I know URGE is doing that work. My former organization, Advocates for Youth, also has is working with college campuses. So I think that there are probably I know that this has come up in the legal realm in terms of, this, because abortion has taken up a lot of space, we also need to make sure that we're turning our attention to other reproductive healthcare aspects. So I know that there is work that is happening, but I don't know how far along or how organized that work is. So it's a really good question, and it's something worth like continuing to raise and elevate in different groups. And I'll check with folks and see where that might be, and just note that this is something that is important to college campuses.
Awesome. Thanks, Gerald. So let's go ahead and do one more question really quickly. Courtney, if you want to ask your question.
Hi, yeah. So I'm hoping to start thank you, by the way, for doing that. I'm hoping to start some type of reproductive justice club on my campus. I'm starting this year. And I'm in a very abortion restrictive state. I live in Missouri. And so I'm kind of wanting to know how you would go about if your campus is trying to, I guess, reprimand you for sharing this type of information, and like what you would do to kind of go around that, or if that's happened to you, I guess. That's kind of like one of the biggest barriers for me at the moment. I don't know. So yeah, that's the question.
Go ahead, Didi.
No, I was going to say, if you could share from a legal standpoint, my only advice is just making sure that, you're keeping up with your, what do we call it? I think the academic code of conduct, as long as you're not in any form of violation of that. I think most of the time you should be good. And Gerald, maybe you can add some more legal standpoint to that, but just making sure that, as long as you're not breaching your academic code of conduct or any of the documents that you signed in attendance of the university, I think you should be good. A lot of the times the universities threaten students. The administration loves to give a very blanket threat, say that students are not allowed to discuss this and that. And there are workarounds, but it's generally just that, a threat. So yeah, don't be scared unless you're actually breaching your contract in some way.
I'll note, and Courtney, my law school was in Missouri. I went to Washington University in St. Louis. And so I feel the challenge of being in states that are restrictive. So for our chapter, so If When How has, on law school, we are on over 100 different law school campuses. We do recognize that for some of our students, they may not be able to be as bold as some of, our chapters that are in places like California or DC or New York, where, they don't have as many restrictions. So sometimes it depends on the type of school. So if you're at a public school, there should be, there should be less restrictions on the type of speech or those sorts of things, because you're on taxpayer funded schools, and so they should have less restrictions. It's a little bit more challenging for private schools, who do have a lot more control over what students are able to do. And we do know that we have some chapters that are technically unaffiliated with their unofficial chapters on their school campus, because they can't get funding from their student bar association, which on most law school campus is the student government body that decides, how student funds get allocated. So one of the things that you can do is to see, what other student orgs are already in existence, that there are common interests. And that's one of the beautiful things about reproductive justice as a framework, is that there is a broad, there are broad opportunities for support. So you might not be able to talk as directly about abortion or start with abortion, but you can start with things like, hey, we think that, people who are pregnant and birthing should have, healthy births. They should have access to prenatal care. They should not be, fired for asking for accommodations during pregnancy. We should, can we agree that there should be better childcare options that make having a family more economical? You don't have to start with abortion or contraception. You can start with other issues where there is actually where you can find agreement, and so you can have those opportunities to advocate for other aspects of reproductive justice. And in other cases, you can find out if there's a law school chapter, if there are other graduate schools that may have less restrictions, that you can kind of partner with them on different opportunities. And so it might not be that you'll have a speaker on campus, but maybe you can do a virtual event where you bring in a speaker via Zoom, like this type of event, where you're still able to share that information with folks, and it's not technically on campus. You're using Zoom, you're using your online organizing tools, using social media tools that don't have as many restrictions as doing on-campus organizing. So look for those opportunities to find common ground on some of the broader issues, and then look for those things that don't actually require you to do things on campus. Utilize the growth of social media and the virtual space as a place for organizing. So doing some digital organizing.
Thank you guys. I appreciate that. Oh, sorry.
No, you're good. I was just going to add by saying that there are some students that have been in your position. One person I'm going to put in the chat or organization is Hoyas for Choice. They're at Georgetown. And I think Georgetown is like Catholic or Christian, something's going on over there, and they can't really do anything they want to do. And so it's a group of students who are unaffiliated with the organization, and they have like an asterisk in their name because they can't like legally use the trademark or anything, but they're still doing the really important work. So there are ways to get around it. You probably can't table on campus. You might have to table like across from campus. But I can also connect you with some people at Hoyas if you're like looking for like more information on how to do that and maybe some risk of doing that. And I'll also say I started like a Plan B and safer sex supplies program at Tulane in Louisiana, which is not a friendly state, but Tulane specifically is very friendly to abortion. And so our neighboring university was a Catholic school, and they were not very friendly. So we would partner with that university. So then we were doing all of the work publicly so that they wouldn't receive any repercussions. So there might be an opportunity for you to collaborate with universities that are local to you or in your area, and then work through that as well. So those are two other suggestions.
Love that. Awesome. Okay, so I am going to hand it off to Sarah from NRAPE on Campus to close us off and to talk about an awesome resource that we have. So Sarah, take it away.
Thank you. And thank you all again for your participation in this discussion. And I love seeing the connections that are made from these sessions. So reach out to folks for support. Now that we've learned more about campus organizing for abortion access, I quickly want to introduce our toolkit titled Fighting for Abortion Access Campus Edition. It'll be in the chat here. And on this webpage, you can find a step-by-step guide that will help you take action in your campus community to help fight for a world where all people, no matter their zip code, gender, race, religion, income, or age, have access to the healthcare they need. This toolkit is centered around the concept of community care, which is a collective effort to ensure our communities have the resources and support they need to thrive. We take care of each other. We hope you can utilize this as a resource to continue your organizing work. Feel free to share it with friends, family, colleagues, anybody. Thank you again. Have a good evening. Have a good night. Thanks for everybody. Take care.